There is a war being fought across the state of Texas, and most people have no idea it is happening. It does not make the evening news every night. There are no generals giving press conferences, no diplomats negotiating peace deals. But the casualties are real, the damage is in the billions, and the enemy is unlike anything the state has faced before. It roots through the ground in the darkness, destroys everything in its path before sunrise, and then vanishes before anyone can stop it. This is the story of how 6 million feral hogs turned Texas into a battlefield, what happened when ranchers decided to fight back with everything they had, and what the trail cameras captured in the days that followed. An aftermath that left wildlife researchers completely speechless and forced scientists to rethink everything they believed about how nature manages itself. To understand why what happened in Blanco County was so extraordinary, you first need to understand the scale of the problem that has been building for decades in the Lone Star State. Feral hogs are not native to North America. They never belonged here. The first pigs arrived with Christopher Columbus in 1493, brought to the West Indies as a portable, low-maintenance food source for long sea voyages. When Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto landed on the Florida coast in 1539, he brought pigs with him too. And as explorers pushed deeper into the continent, some of those animals were left behind or escaped. They went feral, they survived, they reproduced, and they never stopped. For hundreds of years, their numbers were manageable. Natural predators, harsh winters, and limited territory kept populations in check across much of the country. But then something shifted. From 1982 to 2016, the wild pig population in the United States exploded from 2.4 million animals to nearly 6.9 million. That is not a gradual increase. That is an ecological detonation. And nowhere felt that explosion more severely than Texas, which today is home to an estimated 2.6 million feral hogs, more than any other state in the country. They have been documented in 253 of Texas's 254 counties. The only county without a confirmed feral hog population is El Paso, and even that may only be a matter of time. These numbers do not exist in a vacuum. They translate directly into destroyed landscapes, devastated livelihoods, and an ongoing battle that farmers and ranchers across the state have been fighting and largely losing for decades. These are not the gentle farm pigs most people picture. Feral hogs are powerful, aggressive, and extraordinarily adaptable animals. A full-grown boar can reach 400 pounds or more with razor-sharp tusks capable of causing serious injury to livestock, pets, and humans. They are omnivores, meaning they will eat almost anything. Crops, roots, insects, eggs, small animals, even deer fawns. They travel in groups called sounders, typically led by a dominant sow, and those groups can be highly organized in the way they move through a landscape. They are also prolific breeders in a way that defies easy control. A single sow can give birth to 2 litters per year, with up to 12 piglets per litter. Under ideal conditions, a population of feral hogs can double in size in less than a year. This means that even with aggressive hunting and trapping programs, the moment pressure is reduced, the numbers bounce back with terrifying speed. You cannot outbreed a feral hog. The math simply does not work in the human favor. The damage they cause is staggering. Feral hogs use their powerful snouts to root through the ground in search of food, and when a sounder moves through an agricultural field at night, the result looks like someone drove a rototiller across the entire area in the dark. Corn crops get decimated. Pastures that took years to establish get torn apart in a single evening. Native vegetation gets uprooted, sometimes permanently, as hogs remove the root systems of grasses and forbs that would otherwise hold soil in place. Riverbanks and stream edges get destroyed by wallowing and digging, which increases erosion and muddies water supplies. The annual economic damage caused by feral hogs in Texas alone is estimated at over $52 million per year. Nationally, the figure climbs past $2.5 billion annually. And those numbers only capture what can be measured in crop losses and infrastructure damage. The ecological damage, the loss of native plant species, the disruption of soil ecosystems, the predation pressure on ground nesting birds and other vulnerable native wildlife is far harder to put a dollar amount on, but it is real and it is ongoing. Farmers and ranchers across Texas have been fighting this battle for generations. They have tried everything available to them. Traditional leg hold traps positioned along game trails, large corral traps baited with corn and triggered by cameras monitored remotely on smartphones, night hunting with thermal, scopes that turn the darkness into a bright green landscape where nothing can hide, poisoning programs hog activity. Entire areas where feral hog populations had been dense and destructive for years were going quiet. Traps that had been reliably baiting hogs for months were sitting untouched. Feeding sites were abandoned. Game cameras that normally captured dozens of hogs every night were coming back empty. Hunters, who regularly saw large sounders on their properties, were reporting that the hogs seemed to have simply vanished, not moved to the neighboring property. Just gone. Completely and inexplicably gone. The initial reaction from wildlife officials was cautious optimism. Maybe the coordinated removal efforts were finally producing measurable results at the landscape scale. But as the reports kept coming in from different counties, from properties where no major removal efforts had recently taken place, a different kind of unease began to take hold, using warfarin-based toxicants that were finally approved for use after years of regulatory battles. Helicopter hunting, allowing operators to move quickly across enormous tracts of land and take out entire sounders from the air in operations that were part wildlife management and part sheer spectacle. Texas law allows feral hogs to be just hunted year-round by any means with no bag limit and no hunting license required on private property. Landowners have organized coordinated removal efforts across entire counties, working together in synchronized campaigns that swept across the landscape. Some years, these efforts made a noticeable dent, but the hogs always came back. Always. In 2024, something started to change, and not in the way anyone expected. Wildlife agencies across several counties in Texas began receiving unusual reports from landowners and hunters. Not reports of increased hog activity, reports of decreased. This was not what a successful hunting campaign looked like. Hunting programs produce carcasses, and those carcasses are documented and logged. What was happening across Blanco County and surrounding areas left no such evidence trail. The hogs were not being found dead in the fields. They were not being trapped and removed by professional operators. They were simply gone, and nobody could explain where they had gone or why. Disease was considered seriously as a possible explanation. Viral outbreaks have periodically devastated wildlife populations throughout history, and feral hogs are known carriers of numerous dangerous pathogens, including swine brucellosis, pseudorabies, and various strains of influenza. A disease outbreak could theoretically remove large numbers of animals in a short period of time, but disease outbreaks leave evidence. They leave carcasses. They cause visible symptoms in surviving animals: lethargy, disorientation, respiratory distress. Disease spreads through populations in identifiable patterns that epidemiologists and wildlife veterinarians are trained to recognize. None of those signs were present anywhere in the affected area. There were no sick hogs stumbling through fields. There were no bodies decomposing along creek beds. There was nothing. Just silence where there had once been chaos. The scale of the disappearances also ruled out conventional hunting pressure with a kind of mathematical certainty. To remove an entire sounder of feral hogs, a group that might consist of 15 to 30 animals operating as a cohesive social unit, requires sustained effort, careful planning, and significant time. Even the most aggressive professional removal operations rarely manage to eliminate an entire group in a single effort. Hogs are smart. They learn quickly. They modify their behavior in response to pressure, shifting their movement patterns and avoiding areas where they have experienced threat. What was being reported across multiple properties in multiple counties involved the disappearance of dozens of groups, sometimes within the span of just a few days. No hunting operation, no matter how well organized, could account for that kind of efficiency. Something else was at work. Researchers from the wildlife management community made a decisive call. Rather than speculate further, they would set up systematic observation and let the landscape tell them what was happening. In Blanco County, a network of motion-activated trail cameras was deployed across remote sections of territory known to be frequented by feral hogs. The cameras were positioned carefully along established game trails, not just near water sources, where multiple species would converge after dark, and around feeding areas where hog activity had historically been highest. Each unit was capable of capturing high-resolution footage in complete darkness using infrared technology. The research team set them and left them, deliberately minimizing their presence in the area. They returned only to swap memory cards and replace batteries, spending as little time on site as possible. For 3 weeks, the cameras ran continuously, recording everything that moved through the area after sunset. The early footage was unremarkable in the way that most wildlife footage is: quietly beautiful, repetitive, full of the small moments that make up a night in the Texas Hill Country. Deer moved through regularly, pausing to graze before disappearing back into the cedar brush. Raccoons appeared near the water sources, working the edges methodically. Coyotes passed through occasionally, trotting along the game trails with their heads low. A few times in the first week, a small group of hogs appeared at the edges of the frame, cautious, alert, moving slowly with that characteristic wariness of an animal that has been hunted long enough to develop a deep suspicion of anything out of the ordinary. Then, in the second week, the hogs stopped appearing entirely, and something else started showing up instead. What the cameras captured was, by the assessment of every wildlife biologist who reviewed the footage, extraordinary. A large predator was moving through the area with a level of precision and deliberateness that immediately set it apart from the opportunistic behavior of a coyote or the random wandering of a displaced animal. It was not scavenging, it was not stumbling across prey by chance, it was hunting, systematically, strategically. Night after night, in the same general territory, following patterns that suggested intimate, detailed knowledge of the landscape, and a deep familiarity with the behavior of the animals it was targeting. It knew where the game trails converged, it knew where the hogs came to water, and knew how to approach without being detected. The predator moved downwind consistently, approaching from directions that kept its scent away from its prey. It used terrain features, shallow ravines, dense brush lines, rocky outcroppings, as concealment, staying low and slow and patient until it was close enough to strike. When it encountered a group of feral hogs, it did not simply attack the nearest animal. It watched. It assessed the group, identifying individuals by their position and behavior, and then it moved rail, in ways specifically designed to scatter the sounder, creating panic and confusion, isolating younger or weaker individuals from the protective mass of the group before committing to a decisive strike. This was not the hunting behavior of an animal acting on pure instinct alone. This was something that had learned, through accumulated experience in this specific landscape, exactly how to dismantle a feral hog group with minimum risk and maximum efficiency. Over the course of several recorded nights, the pattern repeated itself in the same general area. The predator returned to territory it had already cleared, sweeping through it methodically until no hogs remained. Wildlife biologists reviewing the footage described what they were seeing as high-order predatory behavior, the kind associated specifically with large felids that hunt in territories they know intimately, animals that have developed individual hunting strategies refined over years of lived experience in a particular place. The animal was not just killing hogs opportunistically, it was systematically removing them from the territory, one group at a time, with a thoroughness and persistence that no human hunting operation had ever managed to achieve in the same area over the same span of time. The identification of the predator sent an immediate ripple through the wildlife management community because it forced a fundamental reconsideration of how ecologists had been thinking about the feral hog problem in Texas. For decades, the dominant assumption had been that feral hogs in most of Texas existed in a largely predator-free environment, that the only real population control mechanisms available were human intervention and the occasional disease outbreak. Natural predators like coyotes will occasionally take a piglet that has strayed, but coyotes are nowhere near large enough to threaten adult hogs, and sounders are socially cohesive units that offer significant protective cover to their young. The idea that a native predator might be capable of systematically dismantling entire sounders had not been seriously entertained in the wildlife management literature. But the trail camera footage demanded that assumption be reconsidered entirely. And when researchers began looking more carefully at the existing scientific literature on predator-prey relationships in Texas, they found that the evidence had been building quietly for years. A landmark study conducted by the Borderlands Research Institute followed 16 GPS-collared mountain lions across the Davis Mountains of West Texas, documenting their behavior across 200 confirmed kill sites. What the data revealed was striking. Feral hogs were among the top prey species in the mountain lion diet, accounting for a significant portion of kills, alongside deer, elk, and javelina. The lions in that study had developed specific, repeatable strategies for hunting hogs, and they did so consistently, deliberately, and with a success rate that challenged the conventional wisdom about what a native predator was capable of. Mountain lions, also known as cougars, pumas, or panthers, are the largest wild felids remaining in North America, and they have a history in Texas stretching back thousands of years. Historically, they ranged across virtually the entire state. Decades of predator control programs, driven largely by livestock industry pressure, pushed them into the most remote terrain in the far western and southern portions of the state. By the mid-20th century, mountain lions had essentially vanished from large sections of their historical range. But something had been happening in the years since then, quietly and largely unnoticed. The mountain lions had been coming back. Trail camera systems deployed by private landowners in Texas parks and wildlife department personnel across the Hill Country and Edwards Plateau had been capturing mountain lion sightings with increasing frequency over the past decade. Reports were coming in from counties where lions had not been confirmed in living memory. Young males, pushed out of established territories as populations in the core ranges of West and South Texas slowly recovered from generations of hunting pressure, were expanding outward into new landscapes and, critically, finding in those landscapes an abundance of prey unlike anything available where they had come from. In many areas where mountain lions were newly reestablishing themselves, that abundant prey included feral hogs, millions of feral hogs, predictable in their habits, concentrated around water sources and feeding areas, and in many ways easier to hunt than the white-tailed deer that mountain lions have always pursued. This is where the story in Blanco County becomes not just fascinating, but genuinely important for the future of wildlife management in Texas. What the trail cameras captured was not an isolated incident. It was a snapshot of a larger ecological process unfolding quietly across the hill country. a process in which the return of a native apex predator was beginning to exert genuine, measurable downward pressure on one of the most destructive invasive species the state had ever faced. The mountain lions were not simply passing through, they were settling, they were establishing territories, they were hunting, and they were doing it in a way that sophisticated human control programs had not managed to replicate at this scale. When the research team understood what they were witnessing, they made an unusual and critically important decision. They pulled the cameras out. They withdrew from the monitoring area entirely, removing all traces of human presence from the territory. This was not a retreat born of uncertainty. It was a calculated scientific choice rooted in a deep understanding of mountain lion behavioral ecology. Every biologist on the team knew that mountain lions are extraordinarily sensitive to human disturbance. An animal that detects consistent signs of human presence in its hunting territory will modify its behavior in response, potentially abandoning areas where it has established successful patterns and built the kind of intimate landscape knowledge that makes those patterns possible. If there was any genuine chance of allowing this natural predator-prey dynamic to continue and expand, the worst possible thing the researchers could do was compromise it by maintaining a human footprint in the area. The implications extended well beyond Blanco County. Wildlife managers across Texas had been struggling for years with a problem that went beyond raw numbers, the problem of scale. Trapping is effective, but labor-intensive, expensive, and limited in the area it can cover. Aerial hunting produces impressive short-term results, but requires helicopters, trained operators, and ongoing financial investment that many counties simply cannot sustain indefinitely. Toxicant programs are scientifically promising, but politically controversial. All of these methods share a fundamental limitation. They require sustained human effort and continuous resources to maintain whatever reduction they achieve. The moment that investment stops, the hog population recovers. It has always recovered. A native predator operating within its established territory requires none of those resources. It hunts because it is hungry, because hunting is the defining activity of its existence, because the territory it has claimed and learned is its home. It does not need a grant renewal or a committee vote. It does not clock out at the end of the working day. It hunts night after night, season after season, with a consistency and dedication that no human program has ever matched. And if the footage from Blanco County was representative, not a singular event, but a pattern occurring across multiple areas where mountain lions were reestablishing themselves, then the aggregate impact on feral hog populations across a significant portion of central Texas could be substantial in ways that no one had yet tried to calculate. Consider what it means, ecologically, to have an apex predator return to a landscape from which it was absent for generations. The effects do not stop at the prey species the predator directly kills. When feral hogs sense the presence of a predator in their territory, they change their behavior in ways that ripple through the entire ecosystem. They become more cautious. They spend less time in open feeding areas. They move more frequently and in less predictable patterns. They avoid certain terrain features that might put them at a disadvantage in an encounter with a large felid. This phenomenon, well documented in wolf and elk systems in Yellowstone and in big cat and ungulate systems across Africa, is called the landscape of fear. And it means that a predator does not need to kill every animal in a territory to affect the behavior of every animal in that territory. The simple knowledge that a mountain lion is present changes how the hogs move, where they feed, and how long they stay in any given location. That behavioral shift alone can significantly reduce agricultural damage, even before a single animal is killed. None of this means that mountain lions represent a simple or complete solution to the feral hog crisis. Even a meaningfully recovered mountain lion population would be small relative to millions of feral hogs spread across the state. Mountain lions in Texas exist naturally at low densities, spread across large home ranges, and even the most productive territory can only support a handful of these animals at any given time. The lions will not solve the problem on their own. The helicopter hunts, the trapping programs, the toxicant research, all of it remains necessary. But the footage from Blanco County, taken together with the data from the Davis Mountains predation study, suggests something that had not previously been fully appreciated. That native predators, given the space and freedom to operate, can become genuine partners in the management of invasive species, not replacements for human programs. Partners, operating in parallel, covering ground that human programs cannot cost-effectively reach, working at hours and in conditions that make human hunters ineffective, bringing to the task a level of landscape knowledge and behavioral sophistication that no technology has yet replicated. There is another dimension to this story that connects the events in Blanco County to a policy shift that Texas was beginning to make. Beginning September 1st of 2024, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department implemented new regulations governing mountain lion hunting and trapping, the first regulations of their kind in Texas history. The state had previously classified mountain lions as unprotected non-game animals that could be killed at any time by any person on private land without license or limit. The 2024 rules did not change that fundamental classification. Mountain lions can still be hunted year-round, but for the first time, canned hunts targeting mountain lions were explicitly banned. Hunts in which a lion is trapped, held in captivity, transported to an enclosed area, and then released to be shot at close range. The new rules also required anyone setting traps that might capture mountain lions to check those traps every 36 hours. These were the first formal protections for Texas mountain lions in the state's history, and they represented a meaningful shift in official attitude toward a species that had been treated for most of the past century as little more than a nuisance to be eliminated. The timing, arriving just as trail cameras were capturing footage that would force a complete reconsideration of the mountain lion's ecological role, felt almost like the beginning of a new chapter, rather than the conclusion of an old one. The rancher in Blanco County, who had spent years and thousands of dollars fighting a losing battle against feral hogs, walked his fields in the weeks after the trail camera footage was reviewed. The ground was undisturbed in a way it had not been in years. The rooting damage had stopped. The traps sat empty, not because the hogs had learned to avoid them, but because the hogs were gone. Not relocated to a neighboring property. Gone from the territory in a way that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like it might hold. He had not done anything differently. He had simply been living on land where, unknown to him, moving silently through the nights while he slept, a mountain lion had decided to hunt. And that animal, operating entirely on its own terms over the course of a few weeks, had accomplished something that years of expensive human effort had failed to achieve. It had cleared the territory, completely, without a budget, without a plan, without a press release. Just a predator doing what predators have always done. This is what the trail camera footage revealed. Not a monster, not a threat to be managed out of existence. A predator doing exactly what predators evolved to do, maintaining balance in a landscape that had spent decades lurching dangerously out of it. The feral hogs had arrived because humans brought them here and then lost control of them. They had thrived because the natural systems that would have held their numbers in check had been dismantled by generations of predator control campaigns that prioritized short-term agricultural productivity over long-term ecological stability. In trying to make the land safer for livestock, those campaigns had inadvertently created paradise for one of the most destructive invasive species in American history. What the cameras captured was nature beginning, slowly and imperfectly, to find its way back towards something that functions like equilibrium. One predator, one territory, one sounder of hogs at a time. It is not a solution, but it is evidence that the ecology of this place, battered and disrupted as it is, still contains within itself the mechanisms for repair. It is a reminder that the relationships between predators and prey, shaped over millions of years, are not simply historical curiosities. They are functional systems. And when you give them the space, the freedom to operate, they still work. The researchers who withdrew their cameras from Blanco County did so, knowing they could not predict what would happen next. The mountain lion might move on, following prey into new territory. New hogs might drift back in from surrounding properties over months or years. Science does not deal in certainties, and wildlife ecology least of all. But what the footage had shown was real. The behavior was real. The cleared territory was real. And the possibility, documented now, no longer merely theoretical, that a native predator returning to its historical range might become a meaningful part of the answer to one of the most intractable wildlife management problems in the American West was something that could no longer be ignored. The war in Texas is far from over. 6 million feral hogs do not disappear because one mountain lion cleared one county. The agricultural damage will continue. The trapping programs will continue. The helicopter operations will continue. All of it remains necessary. But somewhere in the Texas Hill Country, in the darkness between the cedar and the limestone, a large cat is moving quietly through territory it has claimed as its own. It is not thinking about invasive species management or budget cycles or the political tensions that have defined Texas wildlife policy for a century. It is thinking about the next hunt, about the scent on the wind and the sound from the draw 100 yards to the north, about the way this landscape folds and rises and offers concealment to something patient enough to use it. And in that ancient, perfectly calibrated purpose, it is doing something that no amount of human ingenuity has yet managed to replicate at scale. It is winning.